They're not diagnosing themselves with gender dysphoria. They are adopting a transgender identity. With that comes gender dysphoria, and the remedy for gender dysphoria is hormones and surgeries. So it very much is in the symptom pool of our time. It's a culture-bound syndrome. It can only exist in a nation touched by the modern trans rights movement. Impossible that it could ever have existed at any other time and in any other place.
Because why?
Because it has to be tied to being trans as a natural, healthy state of being. These kids, think about it, they're going through puberty. They're struggling, they don't know why they don't feel so good. And at their fingertips, they have the internet. They can put into a Google search, why do I hate my body? And Google will tell them, could be a sign that you're transgender. Or it goes the other way. They go to school and they're feeling really uncomfortable, and some trans activist group comes in and gives a presentation and tells them, if you feel uncomfortable in your body, that could be a sign that you're transgender. The messaging is coming at them in all different directions, television shows, on social media, everywhere. And the really devastating part about trans is not only is there an explanation, you feel terrible because you are trans, but there's also the miracle cure. It comes with the promise of a miracle cure. If you transition, if you take hormones and surgeries, you'll be happy. And to the adolescent in distress, of course, it's very seductive. Like, they just want a quick fix. Adolescents typically want a quick fix to everything. The medical profession, because of WPATH, offers them that quick fix. And absolutely no one cares in that field of medicine. No one cares how these kids will feel when they're 25 years old, when they're 30 years old, when all of their friends are getting married and having kids and breastfeeding babies. No one inside WPATH cares how these young people will feel. They only care about the here and now and this human right to alter their bodies.
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
It's moving us in a good direction.
How is it that a small group of fringe activists were able to set the standard of care for the entire world on the trans issue?
That's a very good question. One that I have been obsessed with for at least 3 years. So the small group of activists that you're talking about go by the name of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health.
WPATH.
WPATH. They present themselves to the world as being a professional medical association. And until very recently, they did dupe the entire international field of gender medicine. Everybody followed their standards of care. Europe has recently realized that they're fraudulent in the extreme and that absolutely nobody should be following them. So I think, to explain, I think I need to go back even to before the origin of WPATH. Is it okay if I go back to do a really brief, sweeping history?
So the reason I'm asking you this is because it's incredibly bizarre to me. There's no evidence whatsoever for it. Everybody fell in lockstep. It was like a mass spell was cast. Americans, Canadians, Europeans, Anglosphere, everybody went along with this. Anyone who questioned this was horrible. There was simply no evidence for this, and it was a mass delusion. So once we figure out the genesis of this, I want to talk about what we can do as a prophylactic to make sure it doesn't happen again. So go back as long as you want so that you can explain how we succumbed, the entire medical establishment succumbed to a mass delusion.
Okay. Right, so this is a field of medicine that has never been guided by evidence. You're right, there never has been any evidence. You can look at it in 3 waves. The first wave was 1920s, 1930s, Europe, mostly Germany. And they were a bunch of really, truly mad scientists. They were doing insane things over there. There was one of the leading scientists at the time was known for implanting testicles. Like, he would take rooster testicles and implant them into hens to try and masculinize the hens. He'd take the ovaries from hens and put them into roosters. He tried to cure.
Just keep going. Sorry.
He tried to cure homosexuality by taking the testicle of a heterosexual man and implanting it into a homosexual man. This is the origin of gender medicine. And so they're doing their mad stuff with testicles and everything, and then they start experimenting with sex changes. But World War II comes along, ends that whole thing. But the idea is out there that modern medicine can change the sex of humans. And you must, the crucial part to understanding this medical experiment is that there are people, transgender people have not always existed throughout history, no matter what trans activists tell you. But autogynephilic men very likely have existed at certain times and in certain places. So autogynephilic men are men with a paraphilia in which they are aroused by the fantasy of becoming women. It's not transvestites who are turned on by the clothing. It's men aroused by the actual fantasy of becoming a woman. And so I think the Germans, when they're doing all this mad stuff, the idea gets out and it lands in the mind of autogynephilic men that there is a way for them to embody the object of their own desire. So even though the first wave ends, the idea is out and there's no bringing it back. So then we get 1950s, 1960s in the US. It's a time of great cultural change. There's the sexual revolution. There's the you can be whoever you want to be. There's the embracing diversity. And so then we get the second wave. This is Harry Benjamin, John Money, Robert Stoller, Richard Green, and they're doing their little mad experiment. And again, they have no evidence. They're on the fringes, and there's plenty of demand. Mostly it will be these autogynephilic men. And then homosexuals, extremely gender nonconforming, living in a homophobic world who want a medical solution to their sexuality. Those are the two groups seeking this. Again, it's fringe, there's no evidence, but Harry Benjamin, there's a crucial person, and this is how the field got captured, I believe. There's a crucial person. Her name was Reed Erickson. She was a lesbian, and she met Harry Benjamin. Harry Benjamin transitioned her to live as a man. She took testosterone, had a mastectomy, and she was outrageously wealthy. And so she funded Harry Benjamin and gave his fringe group of mad scientists, gave them legitimacy that they never would have had without all of her money. And she really believed in the medical side of it. She would only fund what she considered worthwhile, and that was research into medicalization, no psychotherapy, no helping the people. And that's the origin of WPATH. The WPATH at first was the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association. So the money was put in only for one track, only the medicalized track. Then I do believe that WPATH in the beginning, they were pursuing something like science when they were Hibigda, the first iteration. I think they were attempting something like science in their own weird, crazy way. And they didn't allow trans-identified people to be members, and they didn't allow trans-identified people to guide the science. But then as in the 1980s, the modern trans rights movement is starting to form. And as it does, activists start to join Hibigda. One by one, more and more trans activists, trans-identified people start to join this organization, this fringe group of activists. So to the point that in the 1990s, the group starts to take a shift from away from pursuing science and into political activism with a sprinkling of science on the side. And then, where am I up to?
1990s.
1990s, okay. And you can see this. So 2001, they produced this Standards of Care. It's the first Standards of Care 6. It's clearly ideological. They recommend puberty blockers when, honestly, in existence, there is a sum total of one patient who has ever been given puberty blockers, one young person. And yet still they recommend puberty suppression for young people who identify as transgender based on one. They also recommend reducing the number of letter of referrals, reducing the psychiatric gatekeeping, as they call it. So they've taken a turn. But they also, there continue to be trans activists joining the group. In 2006, they rebrand as the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. This is when they
Brilliant.
They self-identify. I do not believe we would be where we are if they were still called the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association. It doesn't have the same ring to it.
Yeah.
They self-identify as this world-leading professional body. They're still sitting on a mountain of junk science, and it's an ever-growing mountain as well. They produce just garbage studies. There's no control group, not randomized, no follow-up. They're just producing garbage junk science. Then they get themselves a journal, a peer-reviewed journal, peer-reviewed by WPATH members.
Idea laundered.
Right, of course. And then this is the crucial time. In 2007, when they rebrand the WPATH, then they go, at the helm at that time, there's this woman called Stephen Whittle, a woman who thinks she's a man, on testosterone, all the rest of it. And she is not a medical professional. She's a human rights lawyer. And she takes WPATH in this direction of de-psychopathologization. So trans-identified people have decided being transgender is not a mental illness just because they don't want it to be. They've decided that it's perfectly natural and healthy. They don't want it to be a mental disorder. So they go down this path of de-psychopathologization. And then...
What does that mean?
Okay, so to pathologize something, they modeled it on gay rights. So one of the biggest victories of gay rights was in 1973, when they got homosexuality taken out of the DSM. Prior to that, to be homosexual was considered...
The Diagnostic Manual.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's the American Psychiatric Association's Bible, basically. Gay rights got homosexuality taken out, and that was a huge victory, but easily done because being gay, there's no medicalization. You don't need a diagnosis because you don't need medical treatment.
Right.
But trans activists decided to model trans rights after gay rights, so they wanted being trans taken out of the DSM, but they couldn't do that because they need lifelong medical intervention and major surgeries covered by insurance. And if you don't have a DSM code, you cannot get insurance.
Lifelong medical interventions.
Right. For a perfectly natural, healthy state of being, as far as they're concerned. It makes no sense at all.
So they become, as we hear, lifelong medical patients. But we'll get into that later. I just want to underscore that, though.
They do.
Okay.
They do. So, where am I going with this, though?
How did we get into this catastrophe? So how did they gain legitimacy so that every body of, you think of physicians, or one, I don't, but one would think of physicians as kind of more intelligent or more attuned to evidence or science-based. It's just utterly untrue. But how did they succumb to this group of fringe maniacs?
Right. It's really important to understand that there was no other organization for transgender health. They are it. There's no one else doing it. They're the only organization in the world, because it was so fringe all the way up until the 1990s. It was so fringe that most people did not want to touch it. Most medical professionals thought it was an absolute abomination, and they did not support it. And because Reed Erickson injected all the money into it, it gave them legitimacy. And then, they create this mountain of junk science. They have their peer-reviewed journal. They call themselves the World Professional Association for Transgender Health.
Great, again, just a great name.
It really is. I mean,
great name.
All credit to them.
Yeah.
They did a great job.
True.
And so I'll go to let me do the standards of care. So standards of care 6 that I said, ideological, puberty suppression based on one patient, one in the entire world. Then you've got to understand as well that, like, the Endocrine Society, there are 4 main players in this one. WPATH, of course, Endocrine Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Psychiatric Association. Those are the 4 main. And so, of course, WPATH members are in the Endocrine Society, and they're also in the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics. And so the Endocrine, in 2009, they produced guidelines for the treatment of people who identify as transgender, and they base it on WPATH Standards of Care 6. Many of the people in the Endocrine at that time were WPATH members. They're just regurgitating the absolute garbage that was here.
Yeah.
Then WPATH in 2012 produces Standards of Care 7. And to give their Standards of Care 7 legitimacy, they cite the Endocrine 2009. But the Endocrine 2009 is based on the garbage of Standards of Care 6, which is WPATH.
Fascinating.
So you've already got your triangle here. There's nothing in the middle. There's no science in the middle. And then something really remarkable happens. This is the remarkable part. From 2012 onwards, all of the major medical associations, not just in North America, but around the world, then base their guidelines and policy statements, recommendations on WPATH Standards of Care 7. But there's nothing there. There's nothing there to the standards.
There's no evidence. It's fictitious. They've just made stuff up.
Absolutely. But they've got lots of citations, and it looks real. So if you don't really look into it, this group that is a professional association, and they've got tons of citations, this looks legitimate. So all of the medical associations fell for it at this point.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I have to pause you because it looks legitimate, but it's literally their job to look at the data. Like, that's their job.
Well, okay, there's this, I like this concept. In medicine, there is a concept called the chain of trust.
Yes.
And this is, you have to trust that the people setting the guidelines have done the science. They've done the research.
That's idiotic.
Well, I mean, it's...
Yeah.
Well, for the doctors and for the med students, it makes sense. For
the doctors,
for the
but not for the AMA, not for the people who are in charge of policy.
The AAP. There's some corruption, I think, going on there, or some ideological thinking. But for the doctors, it makes sense for the med students, for the doctors, for the people underneath the chain, underneath the guidelines, because
yes.
You simply cannot, you do not have the time to question every treatment, every protocol,
Sure.
every set of guidelines.
Sure.
You have to trust that the person above, the people above, have done all of the science, and they've done the best possible research. And the guidelines are based upon robust science. The amazing thing is, of course, that all of the medical associations trusted WPATH at this point.
Okay, but I'm sorry but I don't understand why. Like, if it's your job to look into this, what am I missing? Like, how could they? So I'm also skeptical because, there are replication crises across multiple fields. Studies just don't replicate. So I just don't understand why the people who are in charge of policy decisions somebody just didn't say, well, wait a second, something's fishy here. Nobody looked at the cross-reference data. Nobody looked at the fact that there was just no N, no control group, no placebo. Like, nobody looked at that. Like, literally nobody.
Absolutely no one looked at it. Surely, because otherwise, if they had, they would never have endorsed it. There's two parts to it. I mean, the AAP, that's the American Academy of Pediatrics, absolutely, without question, that organization is overrun by trans activists. They have over 60,000 members, but the people who drew up their insane guidelines for pediatric gender medicine in 2018, I think it was a group of 11, and they're all hardcore trans activists. It's not representative of the entire AAP. So you've got, it's the political movement. This is not a field of medicine guided by evidence. This is a field of medicine guided by politics. And because the trans rights movement was so aggressive, so militant, and any questioning, any deviation from what this movement insists is true is swiftly punished.
Yeah.
So I can see, I mean, there's no excuse for it, but each of the major medical associations probably is either populated by trans activists like the AAP or just accepted it at face value and made some kind of, okay, we feel really good about ourselves now. We're going to say that transgender people deserve gender-affirming care. It's life-saving. It's medically necessary, regurgitating all the talking points. What I find, I mean, if you take the AAP statement, there's evidence even there that they knew that it was mad, because this is 2018. Theirs is based on really, truly no science. Even more than that, it's fraudulent because they took an entire body of literature, which was done on sort of conversion therapy type interventions for homosexual adults, and then they applied that to gender identity in children. There was literally no relevance whatsoever, and that's what they based their guidelines on in 2018. So it's clearly fraudulent, but at the very bottom of their guidelines, there's an astonishing statement where it says, this policy guidelines, or these guidelines, are the work of Dr. Jason Rafferty, and like they're making it clear that one person is responsible for the policy statement of the American Academy of Pediatrics that everyone around the world will now follow and place children onto.
And have followed.
They have. I mean, this medical scandal, the role of the AAP is enormous in this, because they endorsed this medical treatment, and then pediatric gender clinics all over the world put children onto this brutal medical pathway. But it's not normal that they would attribute a set of guidelines to one person. To me, the fact that that little statement is tucked away at the end suggests we know this is bullshit. We know that there's no evidence for it. And when all the malpractice suits come along, it's going to be this guy's fault. It's not our fault. Like, it's so unusual that they would attribute it to just one person.
So I still cannot, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that this is the standard of care. We did a spectrum street epistemology the other day, and a gentleman was on this, and he kept saying, this is not the standard of care. Remember? Yeah, obviously you remember that. This is not this, and he was not a moron. So is it that, like, people just don't believe this is the standard of care? And then I said to him, if you found out if it was the standard of care, would you then say this is a good thing? He'd say no, and I think he's lying. I think he's lying to himself. I think he's deceiving himself. But back to this. So people do not, what is the difficulty in conveying this idea to people? Like, you're conveying something, I see you're laughing. The difficulty in conveying an idea to someone that an entire standard of care has been institutionalized across multiple fields, that is ghoulish and ghastly with no evidence whatsoever.
Not just that, it actually, in order to believe what WPATH was pushing, you really do have to disregard every single thing we know about child and adolescent development as well. And really, truly, the biggest obstacle to reaching people in everything I do is the fact that I sound insane.
Yeah.
The truth is so completely insane.
Right.
That it's like that guy the other day. It's so much easier to think, I have tumbled into some crazy internet rabbit hole. I have been radicalized and now I'm a conspiracy theorist, than it is to believe exactly what you said, that this entire field of medicine sprang into existence based on no evidence whatsoever, required that everyone forget everything they know about child and adolescent development, and really everything we know about what it means to be human. And then the treatments, the very idea that, think about it, like the very idea that endocrinologists could be blocking the puberty of 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds without any science to back them up is mad. That they could be putting them on cross-sex hormones that leave them sterile and rob them of their sexual function without any evidence to support doing that, that's mad. That they could be chopping the healthy breasts off 16-year-old lesbians, again, with no science. It just, I think it's so mad that people look at it and they think...
You're mad.
They think I'm mad, and they think there must be some science. They must know something that I don't know. They would never do this if they did not have proof that it is safe, effective, and beneficial. But the truth is, of course, everything I say is true. Everything I say is accurate. They've never had any evidence. The entire field is ideologically captured, and it's not even the right word. The entire
Ideologically beholden, maybe, or ideologically, it is an ideology.
Well, that's it. They're not captured. They're a cult. It's driven by some kind of pseudo-religious cult that just has a bibliography of absolute garbage junk science, and they're on this quest to make the world a better place, to help all of these trans-identified people. To get into the minds of WPATH, I do believe that they really think they are saving lives.
In Lisbon, I invited them to come in and have a conversation. They wouldn't. I think ultimately they know that they don't. There's no there there. There's no evidence. There's nothing. So just again, go ahead. You wanted to add?
You just reminded me, but maybe I'm going off on a tangent here.
There are no tangents.
Okay. So we're in a late stage of the scandal now.
Yeah.
The pediatric side of it has been going since 1998. And we're at the stage now where they really do know, you're right, they do know that there's no evidence. They do know that the outcomes are not the success, these kids are not living happily ever after. They know there's regret. They know that the psychological issues.
We've met the
detransitioners, right. And they can see that the outcome is not what they thought it was. And so just a few months ago, there were WPATH members, it was a Dutch paper. They published this 20-page paper redefining success. They're like, okay, so, we know that it's not working out how we intended. We know that these kids are not doing any better. We don't really know what we're treating. We don't know what a successful outcome looks like. So instead of, solving their gender distress, instead of measuring psychological outcomes, we need to look at a different way of defining success. And that's the whole thing. It's always been a language game. Yeah, it's been a failure, so let's just redefine what success means.
So you say we're in the late stages of this now. Europe has repeated this. We should probably talk about Tavistock a little bit. But this is still going on in California. This is still going on. Children are still being harmed. Is that not correct?
No, that's absolutely correct. North America, we're the outliers. I'm in Canada. It's even worse, I would say, in Canada.
Yeah. I'm against the death penalty personally, but I would like to see every single person responsible for this at any level, including hospital administrators, spend every single day in solitary confinement for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I feel that too. I always try to remind myself of the psychology of the true believer. Like when you have ideology blinds people, you can commit terrible crimes in the service of an ideology and not even realize it. That's
Binds and blinds, as Haidt says.
Sorry?
Binds and blinds.
Okay.
Morality binds and blinds. Okay, so this is still going on now. There are still people like Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California, who is still rah-rah siskumba. Harris, the former VP and presidential candidate, had she, her in her Twitter bio. This is as if anybody ever questioned it. So it's, again, as I've said for years, it's a type of signal that you belong to a group or a tribe. So where do we stand now? Where does it stand now?
I think because the real problem in North America that Europe did not have is all of the major American medical associations backed this in the 2010s. They all backed it from a human rights perspective, not from a medical evidence-based perspective. It's always been political. Whereas in Europe, the major medical associations weren't out there, calling for gender-affirming care for kids and vilifying anyone who disagreed. So they were better able to take a step back when they realized something's not quite right here. In Europe, they were able to look at the evidence. Any nation that looks at the evidence for pediatric gender medicine realizes very quickly that there is none, and then they stop doing it. In North America, the Democrats, how on earth are they going to turn this around?
How are they going to? You can't say, I was wrong about something like this, whereas you can say I was wrong about something like, well, we want to build a public rail here. We think it'll be a net positive for the economy in a certain region, but you can't say I was wrong about mutilating children's genitals.
There you go. You
have to double down.
You do. You have to, especially because you vilified everyone.
Horrifically vilified those who ask questions.
Right. So I personally actually can't see that. Same thing in Canada. We've got Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. You are a bad person if you don't support this medical treatment. It's a human right. It's life-saving care. How do you backtrack? How do you say, I got this wrong? It's hard for anyone to say, I got this wrong. But when so many young people, innocent young people, have come to terrible harm because you got it wrong,
right, it's
even harder.
You have to double down.
You do, but there's going to come a point where you just cannot. It can't go on forever. Medical scandals always come to an end. And we're getting close to it. The problem I have, the fear I have, is medical malpractice. We have a bunch of detrans lawsuits. It's very hard to win medical malpractice, especially when the doctors who are being sued can just say, I was following the standards of care. If you are following the actual standards of care for your field, it doesn't matter how insane they are, you're not guilty of malpractice. And that's what I fear for all of these lawsuits.
So the lawsuits have to go up the chain.
That's what I would like to see. I don't know why WPATH is not named in a lawsuit already. The American Academy of Pediatrics is named.
They have to be named.
They are already.
The hospital administrators have to be named. They just have to be named. If not, so just if I may share an anecdote, when I asked for evidence, I was at a university where I will not name, and I asked for evidence about, a wide berth of things. I was told all I asked is for evidence. That's it. That's literally it. I was told that I was a transphobe, that I was hostile to the rights of trans people, that I shouldn't be teaching at the institution. I was told that that I was microaggressing them, that I was reported at a university I will not name. So that makes it, they've gone after people who even asked for evidence. So I don't know how, in Helen Joyce, in an interview with me, said the very last people who will say they're wrong, in fact, they probably can't say they're wrong, are the parents who have done the one job, the only job as a parent, you're a parent, the only job as a parent is to protect your children. And they have done the worst possible harm to their children. So they're all in. They're all in. They're all in. And the Democrats are all in Canada, the Liberals are all in. They can't change their mind. It's too ghastly. So I don't see this going away anytime soon.
I don't either, especially because of the lawsuits. But I do think that public opinion has shifted in that when I first started writing about this, it was 2020. And nobody knew anything about it. It was so fringe. The truth was so suppressed that nobody knew anything about it. It's hit the mainstream, and the vast majority of people see it instantly for what it is. If they're presented with the evidence, they see it for what it is.
And what evidence is that?
This is, well, first of all, that it's even happening.
Yes.
Because
it's not the standard of care. It's a good thing that it's a standard of care.
Yeah, but I mean, when people really truly understand that they're chopping the healthy breasts off 16-year-old girls, the vast majority of people find that hideous. That's a ghastly crime. And so it's out there. People now understand that it is happening, and the vast majority of people don't support it. I mean, in the US, you've got Trump and his executive orders. I don't really understand what power those executive orders have, but they are pure sanity on the gender issue. The language is plain, perhaps a little bit more extreme than I would have used, but true. I think he called it mutilation of children or something. I mean, it's very strong language. So
the fact that it's Trump, but the fact that it's Trump means that the same people are going to hate it because they think he's literally Hitler. But they don't think he's literally Hitler because they didn't march in the streets they don't really believe he's literally Hitler, but that's kind of a thing to say. All right.
I think what's going on in the US is even worse for Canada because we have this "we're better than Americans" mentality. And so if Trump's doing something, we're going in the other direction. We will just double down, triple down on this. So I'm absolutely, it will end. It will.
You really believe that it will end?
The pediatric side will. I'm sure of it. You cannot ignore. I'm getting a bit tired, to be honest, of systematic reviews. There's Sweden, there's Finland.
The CAST review?
Well, England did one even before the CAST review, and then the CAST review itself was built upon a stack of systematic reviews.
And they attacked Hillary Cass brutally, viciously.
Yeah. Canada just produced systematic reviews. So we keep looking at the same evidence, we keep looking at the same garbage junk science, we assess the quality, and then we come to the conclusion that it's garbage junk science. And it's like, how many more times are we going to do that? I don't think that's the way. I think what we need is just, we need to understand that we're not going to win this with evidence, because
Correct.
It was never based on evidence.
100%.
They don't care about the evidence.
100%. And the sooner people can be honest that they don't care about evidence, the better we'll be.
I mean...
Yeah, so I just keep thinking about that interaction you had with that guy the other day. And I don't want to say his name, and I'm even hesitant to bring it up because I don't want to... I don't know. I don't want to target him. But I'm also trying to think, like, how am I going to make this point? The fact that so we did the spectrum street epistemology exercise, and we added another map, which is kind of a big thing for us. Absolutely agree, strongly agree, slightly agree, or agree, slightly agree, neutral, and then on the other side. And he didn't even know what WPATH was. Like, he never even heard of it. But yet he had a strong, like, he should have been on the neutral. But yet the guy who goes around helping people calibrate to the beliefs to the evidence had inappropriately, in a radical way, he had radically miscalibrated his beliefs to the evidence. He was standing on a line or on a map that he absolutely should not. He never even heard of WPATH. And then when we drilled down on that, we found out that he had a non-binary child.
There you go.
Yeah, now explain that "there you go" to me. Because it's obvious to me, but people are going to be listening to this and be like, what do you mean "there you go"?
This is that it always comes to this. If people are thinking about the trans-identified people that they know in their lives, and this medical treatment is tied to a human rights cause, and so opposing or questioning the medical treatment therefore means you question the human rights of trans-identified people.
Right.
And to do that makes you a bad person,
Right.
makes you transphobic. So he,
Right.
with his loyalty to his non-binary child, could not, always had to be on the positive,
Right.
supporting side of this medical treatment, because to do anything else would make him transphobic. There is the problem in that WPATH, because they present themselves as being a medical organization, but they're not. They're a trans activist organization. Their goals are political goals. Their goals ultimately are access to hormones and surgeries on demand for absolutely anyone of any age who identifies as transgender. You cannot, they view that's not the word. They view guardrails as transphobic gatekeeping. They call it gatekeeping. Their sole mission is full unfettered access to these hormones and surgeries. That's all they want. That's a human rights cause. And if you oppose that, you're a bad person. Now, to go back though, 2010 is basically when they did this. And it was a different time. You see, I don't know if it would have been this catastrophic had the social contagion not started. So in 2010, we did not have the social contagion. The only people who were seeking this medical treatment were autogynephilic men and a few gender non-conforming homosexuals who did not wish to be homosexual. They wanted a remedy for their homosexuality. That was the landscape in 2010 when they redefined this into a human rights cause, and off we go, affirmation and access to medical treatment. But because within a couple of years, and because at the same time the modern trans rights movement was bombarding society with the messaging that what makes you a man, a woman, a boy, or a girl is a gender identity, your body is not important. They're sending this message into schools, it's in television shows, it's in the media, it's everywhere, and then they're bombarding kids in a stage of identity development with this messaging that triggers the social contagion. So WPATH's unfettered access to hormones and surgeries gets going right at the same point that the trans rights movement triggers a social contagion, and then the two things collide. And all of these kids who are just confused and mistaking their normal pubertal woes for a sign that they are transgender, they meet this medical treatment, this medical protocol with no guardrails, with no safeguarding. They just tumble into the abyss. They get permanently injured. And then the icing on the cake, I think, for me, is then WPATH. They have this way of looking at detransition as they'll say these kids have to own and take active responsibility for the permanent, irreversible medical decisions that they made. So WPATH sees the harm. They see all the kids at the bottom of the abyss and they're all injured and whatever, and they feel regret and they're miserable. But it's their fault for jumping into the abyss in the first place. WPATH not realizing that they are the ones who took all the guardrails away.
Yeah, so let's linger on that for a second. So correct me if I'm wrong, but from the standard of care for WPATH, like 6 to 7, was it? Rachel Levine, the then Biden's...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know where I'm going with this? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
It's Standards of Care 8. So Standards of Care 8 came out in 2022. This is a really interesting... I was talking to you about this. First of all, it's such an incredible medical scandal. It's got everything. We have got blackmail, deception, conspiracy, fraud. We've got like this professional association that is just like setting the standards of care when
victims.
We've
got victims.
We've got victims being harmed. We've got whistleblowers
Ghastly
speaking
harms,
out.
yep.
It's got everything. So journalists should be all over this. The mainstream media has failed massively on this. And it's very telling that they didn't cover this incredible story of WPATH Standards of Care 8. So they produced this. It's a mad document. You have to read it. It's got hundreds and hundreds of citations.
I've seen some of it, yeah.
It's got a whole chapter on eunuch as a valid gender identity that even children can possess. This is just basically men with castration fetishes, and they identify as eunuchs. And there's a whole chapter on eunuch-affirming care. It's got a chapter on non-binary, which I think we'll come back to later. Like non-binary, people think that's just blue hair and silly pronouns, but there's a medical side to non-binary in that they'll create second sets of genitals and all the rest. So they have a whole chapter on non-binary surgeries. But the real fraudulent conspiracy madness comes from the adolescent chapter. So they published in September 2022, and there were minimum lower age limits in the adolescent chapter for the hormones, the puberty blockers, and the surgeries. And they were quite mad. They really were quite mad in that I think bilateral mastectomies for teenage girls was set at 14 or 15. Vaginoplasty, which is the inversion of a penis, was set at 17. Really quite insane lower age limits anyway. And then a couple of days afterwards, the lower age recommendations disappeared. WPATH's explanation was they said they published the wrong version, which is completely insane. We published the wrong version. This is the real one. And then we now know what happened.
From emails.
We do. So this is fascinating. I love this. The Alabama banned this gender medicine, pediatric gender medicine. They banned all of these medical interventions for children and adolescents. And the ACLU, as they do, launched a lawsuit challenging the ban. And then in this legal process, Alabama got discovery. They got 2 million emails on how Standards of Care 8 was drawn up, and we've only seen a fraction of them so far, and we've learned an awful lot. The age limits, it's truly remarkable. So it was published. Admiral Rachel Levine, this is I'm going to say he's an autogynephilic man. I don't know that we can be sure of that, but all signs point to this man being an autogynephilic man. He transitioned in middle age, he's heterosexual, he was married, he has kids. He thinks he's a woman. He was Biden's Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Services. He's also a prominent member of WPATH, and I believe he has connections to the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics. So in the emails you see that when it's published and there's the lower age limits, he pressures WPATH to remove them because the lower age limits will hurt all of the legal battles going on at the state level about banning gender-affirming care for minors. WPATH at the time say, at first, they're reluctant because you simply cannot do that. Standards of care takes years. I think they started in 2018 drawing up standards of care. Like it's a 4 or 5 year process. You have expert consensus. It's years and years of working on this document. You cannot just at the end of it all take out something so important. So they're pushing back, saying we don't want the US politics to influence the international guidelines for this field of medicine. Even people within WPATH were saying we can't do this. And then they did it. They just did it. And the American Academy of Pediatrics played a role as well. We now know that the American Academy of Pediatrics, I don't think we have this confirmed, but I suspect Levine had some influence there as well. The AAP basically said, if you don't remove these lower age limits, we will not only not endorse Standards of Care 8, but we will actively oppose it. And they put WPATH in a position where they simply had to remove the age limits because it would have been a public relations catastrophe for them. But the reason the AAP did that is because they are also very invested in this being the right medical treatment, because they set those guidelines in 2018. They're responsible largely for what is being done to the children and adolescents in gender clinics. So they did not want those lower age limits, and they don't want the bans overturned because they support the legal cases.
Is it because they're filled with trans activists, or is it because they realize that once people realize that this is complete insanity, that they'll be sued, or both?
I think it's both. You see, the ones who pressured WPATH, they're the trans activists, they're the hardcore trans activists. This was an expose done by the Daily Caller. There were just 4 of them, including Jason Rafferty, who drew up the 2018 guidelines. So they've got the trans activists who really are true believers, and they do believe that this is life-saving care, and they're on this ideological quest. And then the AAP, as an organization, how could they possibly admit that they got this wrong?
It's a huge thing to get wrong. I mean, it's a massive, this is not like this statin will lower your, I mean, this is a massive, massive catastrophe, an unprecedented catastrophe. And the BBC hasn't covered it. They haven't covered it. Talk about Tavistock a little bit, if you don't mind, because that's something that consistently comes up. What is Tavistock?
Tavistock's not even the official name. So it was the Gender Identity Development Service, GIDS, in London at the Tavistock Trust. The Tavistock Clinic is what it's known as, though. We'll go with that. In England, in the UK, actually, no, excluding Scotland, they had just one. I
love that you put that in there, because like 0.1% of the people are going to know, but keep going.
It's very important. It's very important. Excluding Scotland, there's just one gender clinic, one gender service for children who identified as transgender. Started in 1989. They had like 2 referrals the first year that it started. This was, I mean, they saw the social contagion because they saw the numbers. The numbers remained insanely low. Almost no kids were referred to them in the first decade of existing, and then they start to see their numbers increasing. They are. I can't remember at what point. They're very much guided. There's pretty much always the parent of a trans-identified child somewhere at play here. Tavistock had Susie Green. Susie Green is a woman who the story, every trans child, this guy the other day didn't believe me, but every trans child is just basically a sweet gender non-conforming little boy. Usually, sometimes it's a tomboy girl, and he likes dolls and ballet and whatever.
High
and
incidence of autism.
Yeah, there's autism. Yeah. So Susie Green is the mother of a trans-identified child, little boy. There's a TED talk that I believe has been taken down, and I'm not surprised it's been taken down, but it's been archived in places. She's giving a TED talk about how they knew that her little boy was a girl. And it's basically, he liked Disney princesses, he liked Barbies, and the father did not like him being a girly boy. So they turned him into a girl. They told him he was a girl. And they raised him as a girl. Then he had puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. For his 16th birthday, they took him to Thailand to get his penis inverted. That was his 16th birthday gift because he couldn't have it done in the UK. So Susie Green is in there at the Tavistock, which if you want to understand what went wrong at the Tavistock, you can't go wrong. Like, you just have to see that Susie Green was in there influencing all of the decisions on the inside. She's done it to her child. There's the Helen Joyce thing again. Susie Green did it to her child. So it must...
She's 100% all in. There's no way you're going to change her mind. Like 100%.
The ones who've done it to their actual children. I really feel for the parents of these social contagion kids. The teenagers who come out as trans all of a sudden. It's a teenage girl and suddenly she's a boy. There are parents who affirm those kids, and I really feel for them because it comes out of nowhere. They trust the medical profession. They go to these gender clinics. They're told, would you rather a live son or a dead daughter? That's actual emotional blackmail. There's no evidence whatsoever that these kids will kill themselves if they don't get this experimental treatment. So those parents I feel for. The ones doing it to their little boys and their little girls, they don't get quite so much of my sympathy. So yeah, Tavistock though, they go on this, they adopt the puberty suppression experiment. Goodness me, should I go there? Should I go into that?
So this is something else. Okay, so all right, this is such a huge topic. This is why I'm glad you're in front of me and we're in the United States, away from your home, up there in the cold or in the sun.
We are.
You know, one of the things that comes up repeatedly, and maybe you should go into this, is that, in fact, it came up in the Spectrum Truth Epistemology the other day. I mean, you really couldn't have asked for a better participant. His daughter was, I mean, it was just perfect. He was completely brainwashed, like completely brainwashed, and radically miscalibrated the confidence in his beliefs. One of the claims, I think it was off camera, that was made is that these puberty blockers aren't harmful.
Yeah.
So I hear that all the time. He parroted it. Are puberty blockers harm? Now, there's a condition, precocious puberty. We're going to block. That's parenthetical. Just what are puberty blockers, and are they harmful? Like if you give them to a 12-year-old, who cares?
Okay, let me do a quick history of
Please.
The puberty suppression experiment, because this is really interesting too. There are so many threads to this medical scandal, and it takes a very long time to understand all of it. The remarkable thing about puberty suppression is how it began. Well, it's remarkable. Many things are, but how it began is remarkable, because so this is the Netherlands. The Netherlands has a reputation for being progressive,
right,
and inclusive and tolerant and all the rest of it. They pride themselves on that. So they, in the 1970s, take up gender medicine. They are transitioning adults. They're doing the hormones, the surgeries and everything in the 1970s. And in 1988, they published the first follow-up study of this first wave of adults that they've done this experiment on. And the results are terrible. Basically, the men are not happy because they don't look like women. And so the Dutch decide based on they look at this failed experiment. They failed in adults, and instead of saying, okay, we failed, let's hang up our lab coats and that was a bad idea, they say, all right, let's do it to kids. The reason we failed is because we're not intervening early enough.
God, my heart just sank when you said that.
It's just an evil idea, right? They really truly thought because testosterone, male puberty is irreversible, of course. Like no amount of estrogen is going to undo the effects of male puberty. The men look like men. They're men who think they're women and they still look like men. And so they're very unhappy. So the Dutch think, we'll just block the puberty. If we can intervene before the male puberty, before the irreversible changes, then these individuals will be much happier as adults. That's the basis for the puberty suppression experiment. So insane from the start. And then they start to do it. Oh, okay. It's really important to understand that the children at the time, before puberty suppression, I think the actual range is 61% to 98% of the children who, before they had their puberty suppressed, they would reconcile with their bodies. They would overcome their gender dysphoria during or after puberty. They would reconcile with their bodies, and most of them would end up gay or lesbian, because extreme gender nonconformity in childhood is a very strong indicator of homosexuality in adulthood. And so when they start the puberty suppression experiment, right from the very beginning, they see that all of the kids put on puberty blockers progress to cross-sex hormones, all of them, or 98 to 100% progress to cross-sex hormones. It's not resolving. The gender dysphoria is not resolving. So they notice this, but they somehow think that they found the magic formula of which kids will be in the minority who will persist into adulthood as trans-identified adults. They think they found the magic bullet. God only knows how. Like, what we now know about puberty suppression is puberty is the natural cure for gender dysphoria. The cognitive, emotional, and sexual development that a young person goes through is what causes them to settle into their sexed body and their sexuality. And so if you block puberty, you block the natural cure. That's why all of the kids are progressing to cross-sex hormones, and then many go on to surgeries as well. So rather than being a fully reversible pause, which is what they were intended to be when they had this mad idea, what they actually end up being is the first step on a medical pathway that becomes irreversible.
Okay, so let's say that just someone is on puberty blockers and they're 13. Is that and they're on it for, I don't know, is it reversible? Is there any, what Abigail Shar says, irreversible damage there?
Well, the problem is 98 to 100% will go on to take irreversible cross-sex hormones.
Okay.
So the puberty blockers themselves,
or a pathway.
If that were the gender-affirming clinicians still to this day are looking at puberty blockers as a single intervention. But when 98 to 100% go on to cross-sex hormones, testosterone or estrogen, that are irreversible, you have to consider the two as one, because one leads to the other. Puberty blockers make cross-sex hormones pretty much a foregone conclusion. So because of that effect, that unintended consequence, you've got to consider the two as a single intervention, and therefore they are not irreversible, absolutely not. They cause sterility. Like the combination of the two will sterilize the young person. And they know this. They know this because they offer 12-year-olds fertility preservation before they start puberty blockers.
So I don't understand if these are in the standards of WPATH standards of care. If we know for a fact that hospitals are doing this, why is everybody on the left telling us this isn't happening? Like, I sincerely don't get it. Like, why don't they just jump to it's good that it's happening?
That I don't know. I mean, they're still clinging to fully reversible.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to ask you about. The fully reversible is, I mean, so look, I will completely admit this is a very difficult thing for me to talk about. Like, that's why when I was at Genspect, like I couldn't deal with it. It's like as black and bleak as it is. So, I mean, I have seen some videos of the surgeries, and frankly, I wanted to vomit. I mean, it was just viscerally disturbing to me, and it made me sick. Now, all you have to see is someone's genitals being cut off, and I don't even understand, unless the morality is so utterly overriding of their entire consciousness, how somebody can say that that's reversible. Like, I just don't even get what the thinking would be. And of course, it's very convenient for them because they don't talk to us. We couldn't get anybody for your Spectrum Street epistemology except that one guy. We couldn't find anybody at $200 a pop. We advertised literally everywhere we could. Nobody will talk to us. How could somebody, what am I missing? What do they see in thinking this is reversible that clearly with my own eyes, I see somebody, penis and testicles get removed? How is that reversible?
Well, to be clear, they're not saying that the surgeries are reversible.
I've heard them say that very specifically, but please continue.
Well, I mean, I did in WPATH Files. I do remember there was a surgeon in there saying that he had a patient who had detransitioned and wanted. Oh God, it's horrifying now I think about it. He'd had vaginoplasty. He'd had his penis inverted, and he wanted vaginoplasty, reversal surgery. And I thought to myself, what is that? What is that? How can you reverse it? I Googled it, and do you know what it is? It's create an arm flesh appendage penis for him and sew it onto his groin. That's his reversal surgery. So
right.
I don't know that anyone is suggesting the surgeries are reversible.
Well, I mentioned that because I first heard that argument when a colleague at a university I wouldn't name literally screamed at me. She screamed at me, and this individual said, it's reversible, you're a bigot, etc. That was the first time I heard it was reversible.
Okay.
So, but we'll just run with it and say, okay, that was a fringe thing, and the subsequent things I've read are also fringe. That's fine. Go ahead.
You see, the puberty blockers, they will say that's reversible, and then the only kids who then progress from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones in the minds of these other people is the truly trans identified, the trans children, the trans adolescents. They're really truly transgender, and therefore if you don't give them hormones and surgeries, they'll kill themselves. So it's, in their mind, it's life-saving care. They're not looking at it as far as I know, most are not looking at it as being reversible. Although there is the famous Joanna Olson Kennedy, who is also now being sued, actually. She's in California. She famously quipped that, if a teenage girl regrets having her breasts cut off, she can just get some later, as if you just get breast implants and no harm done. It's no big deal. These people are truly ghoulish. That's a monstrous thing to say. The idea that, I think as well, even that's not strictly true. After a mastectomy, it's very difficult to have breast implants because there's scar tissue.
Right.
So, they see transgender children. They see transgender adolescents. They see this new type of human being that I don't believe exists. And because they're seeing a type of human being that doesn't exist, but in their mind, the only way to help this type of human being is these hormones and surgeries.
Okay, so when you say doesn't exist, I was in New Zealand and I was on a boat with someone, a trans woman, and this person told me that they went to, where did they go? Thailand to have a surgery. And this person had a wig, and this person presented as a female. So when you say they don't exist, explain that to me.
I mean, in an innate sense. Transgender people don't exist in an innate sense, meaning no one is born transgender. That's simply, it's not a thing. We have created a type of person, we have culturally created a type of person now at this time and in this place that we call transgender. And there are various different pathways to making sense of your life through that label. You can be, as I've talked about, an autogynephilic man, where you are aroused by the fantasy of becoming a woman, and medical technology offers you that possibility. So these autogynephilic men...
Well, not fully.
Well, I mean, they will sell it to these men as you know, they can become women, that they'll have, I mean, we talked about this last time, the fully functional vagina. They'll call these inverted penises.
I have a very good friend of mine who's an autogynephile, and he has no desire to like go in women's spaces. He has no desire. He just has none of the, he doesn't lobby to have his driver's license changed. He just views himself as a woman and puts on woman's clothes. He's married. He shared a lot with me about that. So it's not. So I'm trying to connect the dots between autogyne. So it's not all autogynephiles.
Yeah, he's an unusual autogynephile for sure. You can bring me back to that in a minute if you like, because I think autogynephilia has driven this whole movement.
Really? Yeah.
But I'll come back to that in a sec. There are no transgender people in the sense that there are autogynephilic men who make sense of their lives through the label of transgender rather than through the diagnosis of autogynephilia. They consider themselves to be transgender people.
Okay, so you said something before that's been resonant in my consciousness, and I'm just thinking about it. You said before that trans activists will say they've always been trans people. Excuse me, but that's factually incorrect.
I think that is absolutely incorrect, but that's where we are. That's what I'm talking about. We have created this type of person who is transgender now. They exist now at our time and in our place. But to the very idea that, I mean, it seems completely ludicrous to me that there could have been all throughout human history people born in the wrong body, suffering this pain and this misery and this torture, waiting for modern medicine to be invented so that they can finally embody who they truly were. Like, I think there have been autogynephilic men throughout history. There's a Roman emperor who, by all accounts, sounds as though he were an autogynephilic man. I think he may have even attempted some form of rudimentary genital surgery. I'm no expert on this, but I genuinely do believe that autogynephilia, being a paraphilic desire, can only arise during times of opulence, during times of luxury, because I think when you're living in a survival mode, probably your paraphilic desire is not front and center in your mind if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, or your...
That's interesting. Yeah, I once made that claim about fibromyalgia and people lost their mind at me. Okay, so when we see, the evidence that people give as well, we see pictures and paintings of men and, or women and less so women and so that means they're not gay, they're trapped in the wrong body. And so you're saying, and I just want to make sure that it's clear to me, you're saying that there's no such thing as someone born in the wrong body. This is strictly an idea that we've created very recently, that we've had a bunch of people buy into, and now we have this category that we've created ex nihilo. It's just like, boom, popped into existence.
Yeah, so they trans the dead, right? Like they've got this thing where they
Jesus was but they never do it to Muhammad.
Anyone mildly
but
gender
Muhammad.
non-conforming, yes, not Muhammad. Anyone mildly gender non-conforming will get transed by these people because they desperately they need transgender people in history, because otherwise it's obvious that it's a socially created category from the modern times. It can be women who, were gender non-conforming and presented as men because of the opportunities that opened up for them. They'll trans them. They'll call them men. But that's not a transgender person in the sense that we now believe exists.
Okay, so I've been thinking about something, and if this is just too weird, let me know, or if it's outside your area, let me know. So I've been wondering if there's a kind of mini substitution hypothesis going on. That is, every age has, in anthropology, they call it a culture-bound syndrome. I wrote about this in my first book. There was a syndrome called Coro, where men believed their penises were retracting. Oh, you know that? Yeah.
Of course.
Well,
Love that
their
one.
penises are retracting into their body. I'm just totally throwing this out. This is rampant speculation. So it was cutting, it was bulimia. Those were kind of social contagion. Those how people manifest certain things. So with the advent of trans, if my bizarre speculation is correct, that we go through these cultural trends of contagions, cutting oneself, bulimia, the two recent ones, if that's correct, then we would see a decrease in cutting and bulimia now, because it would move on to trans. I mean, is that just too weird, or is there a there?
That's absolutely spot on.
Really? Oh my God! Did you hear that?
It is. It's absolutely spot on. I've written about this endlessly. I've talked about this endlessly.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I thought I was coming up with a cool new idea. Sorry.
No. It is very much a culture-bound syndrome. It is the social contagion of our time, and it is exactly like anorexia, bulimia, cutting. This is just the next one. And anorexia and bulimia, they're still with us, but far, far less so. And you can, if you look into, you can look at like, when the Google searches, anorexia, the use of anorexia plummets.
Trends, Google Trends. Yeah.
As gender dysphoria increases. This is just, it's Edward Shorter's concept of the symptom pool. So he was a medical...
He beat both of us to it, okay.
Yeah, well, I think somebody maybe even beat him to it. Ian Hacking maybe beat him to it. But it's the concept of the symptom pool. At any given time and in any given place, there is a recognized set of symptoms that a person in distress can draw from as a way to signal that they're in distress and be taken seriously by medical professionals. And so anorexia would have been the 1970s. That was the prominent diagnosis in the symptom pool. Bulimia came along in the 1980s, and it took the prominent place. Cutting replaced bulimia. They're still in the symptom pool. Anorexia, bulimia, cutting, they're still there, and a young person in distress can select those from the symptom pool. But gender dysphoria, trans, is the popular diagnosis of our time, and it's got an element that bulimia, anorexia, cutting never had, in that nobody
fix it. Is that where you're going?
Right. Nobody was persecuted for trying to help an anorexia sufferer recover. Nobody was persecuted for setting up eating disorder groups for bulimics. Yeah. Nobody handed razor blades to young people who were cutting and encouraged them to do so. Trans is, because of what WPATH did, and again, back to WPATH, it's really important. WPATH made trans perfectly natural and healthy, and questioning that is forbidden. So
right. I want to linger on that at some point, but go ahead.
So all of these kids who are trans, they say that they come out as trans, they select gender dysphoria from the symptom pool, but it's not even really that. They're not diagnosing themselves with gender dysphoria. They are adopting a transgender identity, and that's healthy and it's natural. With that comes gender dysphoria, and the remedy for
Right.
gender dysphoria is hormones and surgeries. So it very much is in the symptom pool of our time. It's a culture-bound syndrome. It can only exist in a nation touched by the modern trans rights movement. Impossible that it could ever have existed at any other time and in any other place.
Because why?
Because it has to be tied to being trans as a natural, healthy state of being. These kids, think about it, they're going through puberty. It's not easy to go through puberty, and they're struggling. They don't know why they don't feel so good, and at their fingertips they have the internet. They can put into a Google search, why do I hate my body? And Google will tell them, could be a sign that you're transgender. Or it goes the other way. They go to school and they're feeling really uncomfortable, and some trans activist group comes in and gives a presentation and tells them, if you feel uncomfortable in your body, that could be a sign that you're transgender. The messaging is coming at them in all different directions, television shows, on social media, everywhere. And so it's very easy, when you're in distress, you're looking for a solution. And the really devastating part about trans is not only is there an explanation, you feel terrible because you are trans, but there's also the miracle cure. It comes with the promise of a miracle cure. If you transition, if you take hormones and surgeries, you'll be happy. And to the adolescent in distress, of course, it's very seductive. Like, they just want a quick fix. Adolescents typically want a quick fix to everything. The medical profession, because of WPATH, offers them that quick fix. And absolutely no one cares in that field of medicine. No one cares how these kids will feel when they're 25 years old, when they're 30 years old, when all of their friends are getting married and having kids and breastfeeding babies. No one inside WPATH cares how these young people will feel. They only care about the here and now and this human right to alter their bodies.
The human right to alter the body, and that includes, God, there's so much in this conversation. Okay, so that includes they will be lifelong medical patients.
Yeah. I mean, strictly yes. If a person is transgender, then they must always take the hormones that align with their gender identity. So they've got to, just the hormones alone, they're going to be lifelong medical patients. Then
It's like steroids too, yeah.
Well, I mean, they'll castrate the boys. So even if they detransition, they'll still require their own, they're not producing any sex hormones, and you can't produce nothing. That's terrible for your overall health and your bone health. So just hormones alone they're going to require for the rest of their lives. Then there's the medical complications that the hormones cause.
Sorry, I'm just curious. What if there's like a Uber super pandemic and people can't get access to these things?
I think about that. I think about that often. What happens in some kind of natural disaster, catastrophe?
Well, what does happen?
I mean, if you don't have sex hormones, your bones just turn to dust. Your bones just deteriorate, right? Like, that's why postmenopausal women will take hormone replacement therapy typically for their bone health. You absolutely must have either testosterone or estrogen to maintain your bone health. And then there's a whole...
That's just literally, I feel queasy now. I feel actually queasy thinking about that.
Can I make you feel even more queasy?
Sure.
You know who Richie Heron is?
No.
I love him. He's a detransitioned. He's the first malpractice lawsuit in England.
Oh.
And Richie told me something. He's spoken publicly, so this is not private information. He speaks very openly and honestly about what was done to him. And there's a horrifying element to this. He was a gay man. He is a gay man. He had a whole bunch of mental health issues, but he went through the transition process, and he had his penis inverted or chopped off. And he regretted it right away, immediately. He said it looked like he'd been attacked by a wild animal. So he's had all sorts of complications, which are terrible and horrific in and of themselves. But there's one thing that he told me that I can't get out of my mind, and that is...
I don't know if I want to hear this.
You probably don't, but it's important, right? Like...
Okay, all right. I'm reseated myself. Go ahead.
So he's detransitioned. He now... he no longer identifies as a woman, and of course he doesn't produce sex hormones, so he has the option of testosterone or estrogen. Now naturally, because he's detransitioned, you would think he would take testosterone.
Sure.
And he doesn't. He takes estrogen, as far as I know. When I talked to him, this is where he was up to. And the reason that he doesn't take testosterone is because it brings back his sex drive, and he becomes aroused, but he has no penis. Even worse than that, though, there's apparently like a stump that twitches when he gets aroused. So he can't take testosterone because that's very uncomfortable. So he has to continue taking estrogen because you have to have one or the other. So there's a really dark side to it, in that it's not as simple as you just detransition, you start taking your hormone and off you go, everything's fine. When women take testosterone, this was in WPATH Files, this was one of the worst parts of WPATH Files to me, is when women take testosterone, it causes vaginal and uterine atrophy, which is the thinning of the walls of the vagina, making it impossible for these women to have sex. And this is not irreversible. We're putting teenage girls into the menopause and then pumping them full of testosterone.
Oh my gosh.
And they very likely never had a sexual partner. They very likely never even experienced intimacy, and it's being taken away from them before they even have experienced
it. They've never had an orgasm. If you undergo, you can't have an orgasm anymore.
That's the boys. Okay. This is if you put boys on puberty blockers, and then when they typically do, then go on to take estrogen. If you start them right at the beginning of puberty, the penis will never develop, so they will never have an orgasm. It's completely impossible. The girls, it's the other way. It's not that they can't. Well, there's so much to this. So their sexual function is impaired because they can't have penetrative sex without pain. And then the testosterone causes the clitoris to enlarge to something like a micro penis. They call it, it's gross, they call it T-dick. This is like, they think they have a little penis, and it's just the clitoris that has been enlarged. But that can be quite painful. And when you stop taking testosterone, it doesn't shrink back down. So they're basically deformed and disfigured. That's going to impair their sexual function as well. The boys who they will never have an orgasm. I was just reading about this the other day, and it helped me understand what's going on in the minds of the doctors who do this to these kids. They are aware that these kids will never orgasm, and they're aware of what's happening to the girls too, that they'll never actually have a fulfilling sex life. But the way they justify it to themselves is by saying that first of all, they see them as transgender people. They see them as they're individuals who will never find peace with their body. They'll always feel ashamed and embarrassed, and they'll feel dysphoric at the sight of their sexed body.
Oh, so it's like a scale, like you give up orgasm, but you get all this stuff?
Well, basically the way they see it is they would never have had a fulfilling sex life because they could never be naked with a person, because they feel such shame about their sex characteristics that don't match their inner sense of gendered self. So they never would have had a sex life, an intimate relationship. So yes, we're doing all of these terrible interventions that are definitely destroying their future sex life, but they never would have had one in the first place. So that makes it okay. And then, of course, it's life-saving care, they say.
So I'm wondering if there's a similarity here. I have a friend of mine who I know from jiu-jitsu who is on steroids, anabolic steroids. And he wanted to go off the steroids. And the doctor told him that the body has a homeostasis. And I have subsequently read about this. The body has a homeostasis. And when you inject an exogenous steroid, like a hormone like that, then the natural amount of testosterone produced by the body decreases because it has an external influence. So you have to stay on it for the rest of your life. So that's one of the things I was thinking, like, what if there's a natural disaster, to use your words, or pandemic or something. But then I was thinking, like, is it the same process? Like, you would have to stay on that for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life. Or no? Or is that just not, is that disanalogous?
My understanding is a lot of the women who take testosterone come off the testosterone once they've achieved the masculinization.
Buck is still on it, I think. Travis is nodding his head, yes.
Yeah. A lot of them stay on the testosterone, but you can come off because you can achieve a certain level of masculinization, and then you feel that that's acceptable, and then you can stop, as long as you have ovaries. Because remember, you absolutely must have either one of the sex hormones. You must have for the maintenance of bone health and overall health. They take, like the men taking estrogen, it's a little bit trickier. They can't come off the estrogen because testosterone is so powerful.
Right.
They would instantly masculinize again. So they're basically making a lifelong commitment. Yes.
So, boy, it's interesting how queasy I feel as a result of this conversation. Just the idea that it's just irreversible. The idea that it's this, I don't want to say conspiracy. It's just, maybe to borrow a Turner phrase, I think it was P.G. O'Rourke, a conspiracy of dunces, or a people who we ought to have trusted to do their due diligence, to look at the homework, to look at the research, to look at the citations, an abject failure. I'm also feeling, I don't know why I'm talking about my feelings with you, but I'm also feeling that there's something. It's like Stalin dying of old age. There's just something that these people will not be punished, that they'll just say, well, this was the standard of care. They'll get off scot-free for this. When those of us have been screaming about this I've been screaming about this, I don't know how long I've been screaming to the ether about this, and and brought up on all these charges and accused of all this crazy shit. And I don't know, it's just the whole thing is just such a catastrophe. I mean, it's such a tragic, I don't know. It's like, and then it also makes me wonder, like, I've often thought we need strong institutions because at some level people can't make decisions for themselves. They just can't be trusted, like the individual I referenced the other day. I'm not going to reference him again, but not even our institutions can save us from our moral impulses. I mean, how can we I don't know, is there any way that we can make sure that, or not that it doesn't happen again, it's too strong, but we can decrease the likelihood that anything like this happens again? I don't see how we can, particularly since we've demeaned the concept of merit.
I think an obvious way is to go back to basic scientific principles. You see, open debate and discussion and disagreement is the lifeblood of science, and That's where we went wrong. I don't believe that any of this could have happened if people within the medical institutions had the right to speak up.
But that was their genius. That's genius about this. Not speaking to people who disagree with you. Like, I never would have thought that would have been like a spear to punch your point home. But it was only a spear to punch your point home because everybody else bowed to it. Oh yeah, you of course you shouldn't talk. Like, everybody went along with it. Like a true bunch of lunatics. And everybody was a coward. Universal crisis of cowards. That's why I told you the other day that I'm not at a conference I will not name, because of the crazy smugness of all the people. Like, oh yeah, now we're against the stuff. And well, where were you 10 years ago? You were nowhere. You're a coward, but now you're smug. I have zero tolerance for these people. So I don't know. I mean, excuse me, is there anything? So okay, so obviously you're right. Free speech, open debate, exchange of ideas. And they've crafted a narrative that if you talk to someone, you're platforming them, you're enabling a Nazi, you're a Nazi sympathizer, everybody's a Nazi. These people have no idea of history and couldn't even tell you what year the war ended. They have no idea of anything. They don't know that hallmark of Nazis is Jew hatred. I mean, the whole thing is so crazy. But it was a genius strategy. Because the moment they started talking to people is the moment they'd be exposed. That's why we can't get anybody on the show. The moment they start talking to people is the moment they'll expose. That's why we couldn't get any participants for the street epistemology who are pro-trans, in spite of $200 a person, advertising all these venues, et cetera. And then people are going to say, well, you didn't really try. All the emails were, you didn't really try to get all these people on. Like, I hear, like, it's so crazy to me. I mean, there just has to be a point where you just say, like, and so I guess another thing that if I may say what's going on in my mind right now, I'm saying in my mind that, so I'm talking to you, and I need to also keep in my mind that you could be wrong and that I could be wrong. And in order to figure that out, I have to have a conversation with somebody who vehemently disagrees with you, because that's a way to keep my beliefs and ideas in check. But I can't seem to find anybody I mean, again, to be clear, we were in Lisbon. I emailed everybody from WPATH. I invited them. I invited myself over. Nothing, crickets. And the emails were not lost. So I don't want to hear that. These people will not speak to you, period.
I'm well aware of that. When I was writing WPATH Files, I spent many, many days writing to each person named in the report, telling them what they said, how I was going to frame it, and asking them, just giving them right of reply as basic journalistic standards. And nobody answered except for one person who just answered threatening to sue me, made a legal threat. And then we got the information from the inside that they had sent around an email saying this journalist is writing about us and do not respond to her. So they're in damage control mode in the sense that they will not, that's their policy, don't talk to journalists, but they frame it, it's because we're transphobes and we're evil, and talking to us, we're too evil to talk to.
Right.
But back to how you prevent it from happening is in the academic, in the research field, you cannot suppress dissent. It seems so simple to me. If you think about what happened in 2018 with Lisa Lippman.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that there are whole journals that suppress dissent. There are whole journals that are active. I mean, that's all they do. Hypatia, that's all it does. But Fat studies, that's all it does.
It just seems so simple, though. It seems like a simple way to fix it is to stop doing that.
Yeah, but
right?
Only if the purpose was to find truth. But the purpose is to advocate certain things. So Travis has a wonderful documentary, Uncomfortable Truths. He couldn't find anybody to argue for the opposite side. So it's public, it's all the peer-reviewed literature and I know people are going to take issue with all, but I think it stands. I mean, Nature is, as far as I know, as far as I last look, it's the #1 cited journal in the world. That's ideologically captured. Scientific American is a cesspool. It's all ideologically captured right now. And I don't know, in spite of what Trump is attempting to do. So I guess I'm agreeing with you in principle. I am agreeing with you in principle. But I'm saying I don't know. None of the journal editors, like the people from NPR, aren't going to say, oh, well, geez, maybe to give us more legitimacy, we should have a conservative on. Although, in all fairness, the New York Times did that with John McWhorter, but John McWhorter isn't even a self-identified conservative. So let me throw out what I'm thinking, and you tell me if this is nonsense. I think we have to destroy the whole system and build anew. Just burn it all to the ground.
Yeah, I mean, that seems easier, to be honest, than ridding all of these journals and institutions of the ideologues and the poison that has.
Yeah, and people will say, well, you don't really mean burn it to the ground. Well, actually, I do. Maybe not like throw a torch into the place, but I mean, the wonderful thing is if we do nothing, it will destroy itself anyway. I mean, it's already on the path of destruction. Enrollment rates are down. I mean, this unmitigated catastrophe, we have to learn some lesson from this. But the problem is, it's still going on. That's the problem. It's not like, oh, well, we learned this. No, it's still going on wholesale in the United States. It's still going on in California. These lunatics are still in charge of major medical associations and bodies. So we haven't learned any lessons.
I'm tempted at this point to go into the last time something like this happened. Can I go there?
Please.
So the reason that I'm a little bit, I'm not that positive that we're going to learn anything from this is because in the 1980s to mid-1990s, we had a major medical scandal that it's almost identical. It's not as bad as today's, but almost identical. And that is the recovered memory movement.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And multiple personality disorder.
Right.
So that was, it's so similar that it's impossible for me to outline all the similarities. But that was basically psychiatry came up with a mad idea. Just like now, psychiatry came up with this transgender people. It's a creation of psychiatry. In the 1980s, they came up with this insane idea that you could repress memories of the most horrific child sex abuse. You could have absolutely no memory whatsoever of being abused as a child for 10 years.
That led to horrific consequences for individuals.
It really, I don't know, it's difficult to even convey how terrible it was, because this idea, they were the WPATH of the time. They were the ideologues. They were therapists who believed in repressed memories, and they believed that they could recover these memories under hypnosis. They didn't even have any idea that they were planting them during hypnosis. They thought they were recovering them. So a poor, unsuspecting woman with just postpartum depression or anxiety or any run-of-the-mill mental disorder could find herself in the clinic of a recovered memory therapist under hypnosis, uncover years of horrific child sex abuse at the hands of her father or mother or uncle or whomever. And then she became absolutely convinced that all of this was true. And then she would go home and accuse her loving father of the most terrible crime imaginable.
Especially for a parent, yeah. I mean, as a parent, that would be just the worst of the worst.
And there's nothing he can do because the burden of proof was flipped. It was he was guilty and he had to prove his innocence.
Yeah, believe all women plus lived experience.
And there are these therapists planting the ideas into the minds, and then there's this whole movement that it's very like now, because you were a bad person if you did not believe these women, because that meant you supported child sex abuse. Now, if you don't believe these kids, you're a bad person because you're transphobic.
Transphobic, bigot.
And so there was this same mad moment where it was a human rights issue. It defied everything we knew about memory. You had to throw away every single thing that every bit of science about the science of memory. You had to throw it all away. And this whole field of psychiatry got swept up in it and ruined hundreds of thousands of lives, truly like absolutely destroyed lives. But then we plunge into an even further realm of absurdity, because an offshoot of recovered memories was multiple personality disorder. And this was a psychiatric diagnosis. They put it into the DSM-3 in 1980. And this was these women who had these repressed memories, and they were supposedly sexually abused horrifically as children. During the abuse, as a way to deal with the horror of the abuse, their personality supposedly fractured. And so these were women who, under hypnosis, again, discovered that they had, 8 different people living within their bodies with different names and different sexes and different personalities. One was a childlike alter, one was a promiscuous one was a very prudish one. And they switched between, they would switch between the different personalities. So the woman, if I'm talking to you right now, I could flip into like a 4-year-old girl, start, drawing with crayons on the floor. There was a whole field that rose up to meet, well, they're ideologues, they're like WPATH. They believe in this completely, even though it's absolutely absurd and impossible in every way. They create a peer-reviewed journal. They have a WPATH. They have an actual...
If only someone had warned us about that.
Well, they have an actual professional association. It was called the International Society for the Study of Multiple Personality and Dissociation. They have conferences. They produce mountains of junk science, and they ruin lives. It was such an enormous embarrassment for psychiatry. Where they ended up, like the multiple personality disorder, these women were finding hundreds of alters. They non-human by the end. One woman had an alter that was a cloud, one a lobster, one had a little a devil. Like they had these bizarre, it plunged into the realm of the truly bizarre. And they've got their WPATH with the annual conferences, and everyone's taking it seriously. They have the satanic panic, which is another offshoot.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
they've got the grandmothers put in prison for sexually abusing children in their daycares, and they think there's tunnels with satanic cults. This all happened in the 1980s to the mid-1990s. And yet we learned nothing from it. What psychiatry did, it was so embarrassing.
Yeah. We will learn nothing from it.
They just swept it under the carpet. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. Let's never talk about that again.
Yeah.
The people who spoke out, who were viciously attacked, just like now, got no recognition. Nobody ever said, "Oh yeah, sorry about that. You were right. We were wrong." Nobody said that.
Has anybody said that to you?
Not yet.
Yeah.
No.
Me too.
Yeah. So I think part of how we prevent this from happening, and that's why I do what I do. I focus so much on the past medical scandals, the past mistakes of psychiatry, talking about multiple personality disorder. I think part of medical training and psychiatric training should be learning about medical scandals. Look what happened in the past, why it happened, how it happened, and then you can prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, that assumes people want to prevent it. That assumes... I know it's a big assumption, and maybe it's that it might strike you as insane that I say that, but it's not clear to me that people want to provide the best outcomes for medical care. For example, if they wouldn't have DEI hires. So maybe they're weighing values differently than we are. Like maybe I'm weighing... I remember the famous video of the DEI firewoman. Remember, did you see that? She said, well, people just want to be comforted when there's a fire, they want to have people look like them. Okay, well, personally, I would want the fire put out at my house, but maybe they're just operating under a different set of assumptions. Maybe they're operating under the fact that, like, if you see a fire person who looks like you, it's better, because it really is the case, and people will try to argue it's not, and they know deep down they're just being dishonest with themselves. You either have people who are capable of putting out fires, or you have another characteristic, right? And we can go into why that is later, but maybe they're just operating on a different set of values. So we don't want to create this. We just want people to feel good about their lived experiences. Maybe we want them to feel included. Maybe we think it's a good thing that we create a new category of person. I don't want to bring in, queering or anything, but there are no objective categories of things. And so maybe, like, in other words, maybe there's just a different value set, and we don't want to solve this. Like, again, Nature magazine just doubled it down once again on the DEI thing. So they're just operating under a different set of values. So who's to say that the purpose of the hospital should be to cure sick people? I mean, maybe the purpose of the hospital is so that you can see a lot of black doctors, so that you can elevate the status of black people in their mind. I think that's one of the things you're facing. There'll be a new ideology which will override the primary mission of every institution, and people will say, well, this was just, outdated 20 years ago. We just really wanted to heal sick people. If we heal sick people, it's a kind of offshoot or a secondary or tertiary benefit of having more people with dark skin be physicians.
I think, do you not think, though, that the people who support that in any institution are in the minority, but they're just a very vocal?
No, I think we've seen the last 10 years that's just not true. Overwhelmingly, that's not true. Unless you want to argue, and I'm completely sympathetic to this, that they are very vocal, but that everybody else is a coward. And they're not willing to stand up and say, you know what, I think my brain surgeon or my dentist should be, I don't care if they're midget, whatever, they should be the most capable of solving my dental pain and ameliorating suffering. But if they really wanted that, then when American Airlines and United Airlines said that they're going to have, their goal is 50% pilots of diversity or something, people would say, well, wait a second, I don't want that. Or their stock would have tanked. But their stock didn't tank, so it shows me that people value the plane landing unless perhaps they're on the plane in the air. People value the plane landing less than they do having black pilots represented. Because if they didn't, the stock would tank, and they vote with their money. That would be my argument. I don't think that they want the best outcomes.
But I think the medical profession, the medical world, at some point is going to have to face up to this medical scandal.
I'm not sure that's true.
Of course they will. They have to.
Well, they didn't with they pushed it under the rug with the satanic panic. They pushed it under the rug with multiple. I think they'll just put, not only that, they're going to say, I never believed any of it. I never believed any of it. They're going to gaslight.
Yeah, psychiatry does just leap from one blunder to another. Like, it's on about a 20-year cycle. They just leap from outrageous blunder to outrageous blunder, and they ruin lives. But I would like to think that this one is so terrible. Sure, multiple personality disorder, it was awful, in that when I talk about this, and I bet on the comments to this video, somebody will say it, there are still people alive today who believe in it. And there are still women who think that their fathers or their mothers or whomever abused them because the memories were put in their mind and they can't get rid of them.
Right.
So the harm is lifelong. Many loving parents died with the accusations hanging over their heads.
Correct.
So the harm really was awful. But this one is even worse.
Yeah, but you're making my point. Because it's worse, they'll never acknowledge it. That's why I think there's nothing that we can do except burn it all down.
But I think perhaps injecting some medical history into medical training, would that not help? Would that not be a solution?
No.
Why not?
It kind of reminds me of what my father said. I told my father once that I think we should teach epistemology in K through 12, and he laughed at me. And he said, why don't we teach them how to read instead? Why don't we teach them how to do math instead? I mean, I think last time I looked, only 8% of physicians had a course in by a dietitian.
Yeah. Oh, I
To
know.
net nutrients, and they don't know about the dangers of sugar, et cetera. So
Okay.
I don't know. I think you're far more optimistic, and I think it is because it's so ghoulish and so ghastly and so horrific that is why you'll see vehement denials that they ever believed it. I think you'll see people distance. And that's the real shame of it, is that the people who did this are going to get off scot-free.
I think very likely they will. I'm not sure yet. I think going after WPATH is the answer, because they're the ones who caused all of this harm. I still would like there to be accountability for the medical professionals, and I still hold out hope that there can be in some way.
Okay, I have an idea. I have an idea of how we can have a short-term, not necessarily see who's right, but maybe that's the best thing, see who's right. I'll tell you what. You have my cell phone. I will text you, and you will text me the moment someone says to you, you know what? Boy, I was wrong. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. This is horrible, what we've done to children. And I am so sorry for what I said to you. I'm so sorry that I accused you of this. So I'll tell you what, if you get 2 of those, I will change my mind.
Okay.
If I get 1 of them, I will change my mind. Is that reasonable?
Okay.
But I think that's a good barometer to judge which side of this conversation history will bear out.
I think, to me, though, the individuals who supported it, you've just reminded me, though, I have had one.
Oh, you have? Okay, so you only
have.
need one more. Tell me about that one.
It was actually really lovely. It was in my days when I first started speaking on this, and I was in that terrible period where I was doing it on Facebook in my real life friends. And I would post one thing about the medical scandal, and then there would be 160 comments, and it was just me against all of my friends. They all thought I was hateful and transphobic, and I was just fighting with all of my friends. And there was one Australian man was a part of this, and I kept on posting and posting. And after, I think I may have posted a photograph of 2 obviously teenage girls with their mastectomy scars, and it hit him. And he wrote me a lovely long message saying, I didn't understand what you were saying, and now I see it, and I'm sorry. And it was a gorgeous message.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, you need one more.
Okay.
Mia Hughes, thanks for joining us in the first part of the conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well.